Federal agents ripped up the kitchen floor of a Chinese buffet in Missouri and uncovered fentanyl hidden inside soy sauce boxes. That shock was only the beginning. Following the money exposed Chinese intelligence links, underground banks shifting hundreds of millions each month, and a hidden DMV churning out flawless fake IDs.
Viral raid exposes nationwide criminal network. When agents pried up the floorboards, the case stopped being routine and turned into something far heavier. Beneath restaurant tiles at several locations hit the same week, Immigration and Customs Enforcement teams uncovered narcotics sealed to look like normal food freight, with soy sauce cartons packed tight with fentanyl bricks, a synthetic opioid so potent it has been tied to more than 70,000 overdose deaths in the USA each year, according to federal mortality data. After the South Fulton raid, 7 people were charged with drug offenses, and officials publicly warned that certain Chinese restaurants were being used as cartel stash houses, built to blend into daily life. That discovery lined up with images already burning across social media. Days earlier, a video from a California Chinatown showed a Chinese man pressed against a wall by 2 women in plain clothes while masked men rushed in, his voice breaking as he shouted for help. With no visible badges, no uniforms, and no clear explanation before he was forced into a waiting vehicle. The clip spread within hours, pulling millions of views and triggering panic across immigrant neighborhoods that sensed something coordinated was unfolding. Another video followed and quickly eclipsed the first. In it, an agent questioned restaurant workers in public view, asking where they were from as cameras rolled. One voice answered India twice, another answered China again and again. The exchange, awkward, tense, and clipped, yet replayed endlessly online. By nightfall, dozens of workers in that same Chinatown were zip-tied, loaded into unmarked white vans, and transported to federal detention centers as bystanders filmed and shouted. Reporters on the ground began connecting dots that official statements avoided. These were not random checks or local sweeps, but synchronized actions tied to Operation Silent Dragon, a national enforcement campaign planned for months. Internal briefings later confirmed that in the first 6 months of 2025, 103 Chinese nationals had been arrested, followed by a sudden surge where detentions jumped tenfold over the same period the previous year, a spike large enough to set off alarms inside civil rights groups and immigration courts. The Drug Administration added another layer when it confirmed long-suspected links between Chinese and Mexican criminal networks. Precursor chemicals sourced from China were being processed into fentanyl, moved through Mexico, and distributed inside the USA through businesses that already handled heavy shipments, cash payments, and late hours. Commercial kitchens offered ideal logistics, from constant deliveries and cold storage to accounting systems capable of masking money laundering through shell companies and falsified invoices. Yet the investigation shifted again when analysts traced payment flows and encrypted communications tied to the restaurant stashes. Instead of stopping at street-level distributors, the trails pointed toward underground banking systems moving hundreds of millions each month and contacts associated with Chinese intelligence operations. The picture changed from immigration violations and drug trafficking to a counterintelligence concern involving foreign networks embedding operational infrastructure inside American cities, using restaurants and nightlife venues as quiet fronts. Adding to the tension, court filings revealed that many detained workers held valid government-issued work permits or had active asylum claims pending in immigration court, details left out of early press releases. Defense attorneys argued that enforcement actions had swept up legally authorized workers alongside suspects tied to narcotics, while federal officials insisted the scale of the threat required speed and secrecy. If agencies had monitored these networks for years, seized tens of thousands of fake identification cards, mapped money routes, and watched restaurants operate in plain sight, what finally pushed the switch in 2025? And why did a Missouri buffet become the place where everything was set in motion?
Dawn breaks with battering rams. September 2nd, 2025 began like any other weekday near Interstate 70 by the Cave Springs exit, where Golden Apple Buffet sat busy and familiar, a Chinese restaurant known for packed tables and non-stop traffic. By mid-morning, the scene flipped when federal vehicles sealed off the parking lot. Armed agents spread out with radios and rifles, and the front doors were taped shut with official notices that stopped customers in their tracks. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Homeland Security Investigations led the operation, backed by Federal Bureau of Investigation agents and local police, all moving in sync across 3 locations tied to the business. The restaurant was the only target. Agents also hit at least 2 nearby homes in St. Charles County, where workers were known to live, arriving with battering rams, tactical helmets, and long guns as neighbors watched from driveways and windows. Doors were forced open without warning. Commands shouted in English, and people were pulled outside in handcuffs and rushed into waiting vans. One resident counted close to 20 detainees from a single house, people they had seen for weeks riding together to and from the buffet in shared vehicles. Inside those homes, the chaos was sudden and frightening. Immigration attorney Jim Hacking later relayed what his clients described, explaining that 2 workers were stepping out of the shower when agents broke in, weapons aimed directly at them, voices loud and urgent, giving orders they barely understood. One worker's 5-year-old daughter asked on a video call why Daddy was wearing orange pajamas. He had no answer that made sense. He'd done everything right, and somehow that meant nothing. Others were asleep, some half-dressed, all stunned as armed officers demanded compliance, searched rooms, seized phones, and documented everything with body cameras. Back at the restaurant, regular customer Antonio Bishop pulled in expecting lunch and instead found news crews and flashing lights. Seeing reporters first, he knew something serious had happened. When told it was an immigration raid, his reaction echoed what many assumed, asking if the people inside were illegal, a word that spread fast across social media before any details surfaced. By noon, signs reading "closed until further notice" hung on the doors. The owners, Guo Lang Ya and Dai Jin Yi, both 56-year-old residents of St. Charles County, were already in federal custody. More than a dozen workers were transferred to detention facilities, separated from families, phones confiscated, names logged, and files opened as officers processed them one by one. As hours passed, prosecutors prepared charges that pointed far beyond a routine workplace sweep. Investigators outlined document fraud sophisticated enough to pass federal verification systems, including employment authorization cards and driver licenses that cleared database checks used by employers. Financial records tied the business to money laundering networks, using layered transactions, cash deposits structured to avoid reporting thresholds, and shell accounts designed to hide large transfers. The most unsettling turn came when analysts flagged communication patterns and payment routes that overlapped with foreign intelligence monitoring already underway. Federal sources described links between the operation and overseas networks previously flagged in counterintelligence briefings, turning a local buffet raid into a matter discussed inside national security circles. What looked like a simple enforcement action now carried implications involving covert financing, identity manufacturing, and operational cover hidden inside ordinary businesses. As lawyers gained access to detainees, another layer emerged that prosecutors had not highlighted. Several workers held valid government-issued work permits, while others had pending asylum cases already logged in immigration court. Their paperwork had been approved or was actively under review, raising questions about how they were swept up alongside alleged fraud and money laundering suspects. If agents believed the threat justified armed raids, door breaches, and mass detentions, and if legal workers were caught in the same dragnet as alleged criminal operators, what exactly was uncovered inside Golden Apple Buffet that morning that pushed federal authorities to move this hard, this fast, and this publicly?
Criminal infrastructure hiding in plain sight. When agents searched the homes and storage spaces tied to Golden Apple Buffet, they realized they were not dealing with simple fake papers, but a full-scale document factory that one attorney described as a shadow department of motor vehicles. Inside were stacks of driver's licenses, social security cards, and work permits produced at an industrial level using printers, cardstock, inks, and embossing tools that matched government standards closely enough to pass checks at state offices and major banks. These were not sloppy copies made with scissors and glue, but clean, sharp cards with correct fonts, barcodes, hologram layers, and seals that mirrored real government issues. Some of the documents cleared the E-Verify system, the federal database employers rely on to confirm work eligibility. One fake Social Security number was used by 17 different workers in 6 states simultaneously. The system never flagged it. Banks opened accounts with it. Credit cards were approved. For 3 years, that single number existed in 17 places at once, and nobody noticed until agents cross-referenced arrest records. Workers showed their papers, employers entered the details, and the system returned a green light. From the outside, everything looked legal. Payroll ran as normal, taxes were filed, and no red flags appeared. Investigators later confirmed that the forgery operation had studied verification rules, timing gaps, and database delays, exploiting weaknesses that allowed fake identities to live inside real systems without raising alarms. Missouri was only one node. Years earlier, federal agents had intercepted a shipment containing roughly 20,000 fake driver's licenses, shipped from Hong Kong and mainland China. The cards were packaged and labeled like consumer goods, moved through international freight channels, and seized in one haul. Despite the size of that seizure, internal sources later admitted it did not trigger a full national crackdown. One Federal Bureau of Investigation source acknowledged that neither informant tips nor the massive license seizure pushed leadership to act aggressively at the time, allowing the network to keep running. As raids spread through 2025, patterns repeated across cities. Chinese-owned restaurants, karaoke lounges, massage parlors, and unlicensed nightclubs appeared linked through the same underground services, sharing smugglers, document suppliers, and money handlers. These businesses served as job placements for newly arrived workers and as cash engines that could absorb large amounts of untraceable income without drawing attention. In Los Angeles, immigration and customs enforcement teams raided nightlife venues tied to these networks and arrested 36 Chinese and Taiwanese nationals for immigration violations. Videos showed people handcuffed and led into vans, but officials said these were targeted actions, not random sweeps. According to case files, the club sat on trafficking routes that ran north through Mexico, functioning as both employment hubs and operational covers for broader criminal activity. Housing followed the same script seen in Missouri. Workers lived together in properties owned by limited liability companies, transported in vans between job sites, their schedules and movements tightly controlled. Neighbors noticed packed driveways with vehicles carrying plates from New York, Georgia, Ohio, Virginia, and Texas, suggesting coordination across state lines. These were not local setups, but pieces of a national system that moved people and money quietly. Then, investigators mapped the cash. Underground banking networks handled transfers without banks, wires, or records. Cash deposited in Missouri would trigger a matching payout in China, minus a 3% fee, settled through trusted brokers using code words and handwritten ledgers. Hundreds of millions moved this way each month. No paper trail, no alerts, just balance sheets kept in private notebooks. A single buffet in Missouri could be washing money tied to Los Angeles clubs, New York construction crews, or border smuggling routes, all while serving lunch and dinner to families who never noticed anything unusual. The business looked ordinary, the workers kept their heads down, and the system stayed hidden in plain sight.
The plot twist. When immigration attorney Jim Hacking finally sat down with the workers detained after the Golden Apple buffet raid, he walked in expecting a familiar pattern of undocumented workers facing removal. What he found instead cut straight through the public story federal agencies had been telling. Many of the people pulled from their homes at gunpoint had followed the immigration rules step by step, filled out the forms, paid the fees, passed interviews, and waited their turn, only to end up handcuffed and locked up anyway. The Indonesian workers represented did not sneak across borders or overstay short-term visits. They applied for visas through United States consulates, attended required interviews, and received official approval to enter the country. After arriving, they filed asylum applications, a legal request for protection allowed under federal law. Once those applications were on file, they applied for work authorization, which asylum applicants are permitted to do while their cases remain under review. Those permits were issued by the same government that later sent armed agents through their doors. One case made the contradiction impossible to ignore. A 23-year-old man from Indonesia received his visa in August 2023 after completing the full process. In April 2024, he filed his asylum claim. Soon after, the federal government granted him a work authorization card valid through 2030. That card allowed him to work legally, earn income, and live openly. In August 2025,
he saw a job post on Facebook advertising work at Golden Apple Buffet, including wages, tips, and housing. He moved into a company-owned house days before agents arrived with battering rams. Hacking confirmed that 8 of his clients had valid work authorization cards in their wallets when they were detained. All had entered through official channels or filed asylum claims correctly. They believed they were doing exactly what the system told them to do. They applied for jobs openly, filled out employment forms, and showed their documents to their employer, who accepted them after standard verification. Their housing situation also told a different story than early rumors suggested. Workers said they responded to online job listings, relocated to the St. Louis area, and moved into shared housing connected to the job. They described having their own rooms and beds, basic living conditions, but nothing resembling confinement or control. Hacking initially suspected human trafficking and pressed his clients with detailed questions about threats, withheld documents, and movement restrictions. After speaking with everyone involved, he found no evidence of coercion or forced labor. Reports claiming that 20 people packed into a single house did not hold up under scrutiny. According to the workers, they were spread across 4 properties. Each person described a private sleeping space and the freedom to leave. The arrangement looked like employer-provided housing common in restaurant and hospitality work, not a trafficking setup. None of those distinctions mattered when federal agents moved in. Workers with government-issued authorization were dragged from showers, placed in handcuffs, and held in county jails for weeks. Some were pushed to sign papers agreeing to voluntary departure, even though they had open cases and legal permission to work. Hacking summed up the irony plainly. People often ask why immigrants do not follow the rules, yet his clients did exactly that and still ended up treated like criminals. If the federal government issued these permits, approved these cases, and verified these documents, how could the same system justify locking these workers away without charges? And what legal tool allowed it to happen at all?
If you enjoyed it, make sure to click on the cards on the screen.